happening? All right, here we are. I am not asking the questions. Tati and Steve, you're asking the questions. I might have had something to do, a little pre-read, no big deal, but we're going to get deep on AI in the retail space and more broadly. Here we go. I don't know. Tati, I'm going to go to you first because you love tennis and you had a horrible experience. No, it wasn't horrible, but you had a tennis experience that came up and I love tennis. But that being said, first question, Tati, fire away.
So the experience, and we can talk about it when we talk a little bit about how we should deploy AI for customer experience and for sports experiences. I was at the Miami Open this weekend, and we were just chatting about how there was so much opportunity, so many great potential customers attending these events, and an opportunity to showcase your brand. And yet we were out there, with cell phones, looking at QR codes and typing up things, hoping for, my service on the phone, and it wasn't working. Did you receive my submission? I don't know. Do you get it? And really simple games that were really cool about 8 to 10 years ago at an
Maybe
event.
12,
Maybe
14.
not as cool, maybe 12, maybe not me. I'm being generous, but maybe not as cool right now. So it was there was so much opportunity. Made me think it made this chat even more exciting and timely and valuable than before I had this experience yesterday, 2 days ago.
But you experienced tennis,
Yes,
which is
that was,
good.
which was great, and there's opportunity there too. But without further ado, I'll start asking you some questions because actually this
Fire
past
away. This is awesome. I like being on the other side. This is great.
I
Hopefully
got
they're
I
hard.
got to see I got to take a look at the Global AI Confessions Report CEO
Oh,
edition
oh,
by DataIQ, and there were a couple of things in there that really blew my mind. And some of these things we know are happening, but number one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this because I know you've seen this as well, but that 75% of CEOs admit they could lose their jobs within 2 years if they fail to deliver measurable AI driven business gains. And out of those CEOs, 70% believe a peer will lose their job, will be ousted by the end of 2025, not even
yeah,
2 years. So with
yeah.
themselves, they're giving themselves 2 years, but they're looking at others and saying 70% of them say a peer will be ousted by the end of this year if they have a failed AI strategy. And then beyond that, 54, more than half of them, 54% admitted that a competitor has already deployed a
Yeah.
superior AI technology strategy roadmap.
So I'm all. I love that you start there. Shout out Data IQ. I love them, and as a company, and I have no idea if I just pronounced their name right. I always butcher that one, so I'm just going to volunteer that I'm not 100% sure. But je m'appelle Alec. Comment allez-vous? This, that, and thing. That being said, I think that you just nailed it, Tati, with those three stats. Those are the three stats that jumped out at me the most. But I want to explain why. I think what's incredible about enterprise AI right now that wasn't necessarily true, 7 to 10 months ago for sure, is that there used to be a lot of questions about, hey, how real is this? How significant is this? How hard do we need to go at our data strategy to build the infrastructure and modernize the infrastructure so that we can unleash the AI strategy that the world is looking for? But I think what that those statistics prove is all the way from the top down, from the board level. Shout out Matt Turk, who is on the board of Data IQ and said that 94% of CEOs, correct me if I'm wrong, said that they wouldn't mind replacing one board member with AI because it's so good and so much more useful than a board member. So again, shout out Matt Turk. But all the way from the board level to the CEO level to the C-suite and all the way down, I think it just reinforces what we all now know, which is the train has left the station. And the faster you act on this in terms of putting an infrastructure and an architecture in place and connect the dots between your strategy and implementation and value creation, the better off you're going to be. But I don't think you have a choice anymore. And I think that's the headline that maybe wasn't in there. It's not an if, it's a when we're going to see some violent shifts in the way that companies do and don't compete with each other. And those that introduce this stuff, it's like introducing a car and competing in a racing environment that used to be just horses only, yet now there's cars and horses and you get to pick. So I would go with the car for sure. So hopefully that answers the question. I try to keep myself to 90, 120 seconds
No, that's excellent,
ish.
and I would say that on top of that, I agree with everything you said. But on top of that, I another stat that really caught my eye there was that 35% of AI initiatives are considered AI washing.
Yeah.
Which was this idea of that things are for optics that and
Yeah.
we've been talking so much about the need to have the right partners in your journey and to have to select the right AI, to make the right investment, because otherwise those will be those failed initiatives. This is going to be, I say it to other board members, by the way, that folks that are out there, that this is cybersecurity 2.0, big time, because this was exactly, but it's going to be 100-fold what that impact was of not acting or doing something just for optics, just to check the box that you did something, but not really to be meaningful. That's also not an option in this case. In with some other technologies, that was an option, but this is not really an option here. So.
No, 100%. So a big shout out to Igor Yablokov, founder and CEO of Prion. I'm using his words. He calls AI it's opera, right? So opera is the ultimate form of expression and creativity. It brings every different type of discipline together. And I think that, another thing that we're all, kind of realizing now is that, to Igor's point as well, we are all, as employees, if you will, we're all going to get between 5 and 10x the firepower that we have today, like horses versus cars, right? And it's really important to really just sit with that idea of what would you do and what could you produce and what value could you create as an individual contributor, as a member of a team, as a member of a department, from a functional perspective, and then more broadly from a company perspective. How do you figure out what actually is a leverageable technology, tool and or AI system that meaningfully impacts the things that matter in your day to day? And no, please don't fall in the trap of like, oh, just AI it, or oh, a chat GPT it, right? Or like, this stuff is bananas. You can't do that at this time. And there are some amazing and extremely important management consultancies, systems integrators, and all sorts of other folks playing in the space who can help you, educating and get further along in terms of your understanding. But most importantly, you got to pick the right use case that lines up with your risk tolerance, with the technical capabilities of the firepower that's available, and have the right people involved, both technically and from an operator and from a business perspective, that burn the boats and move forward with these tools and figure it out, right? You got to follow at least the 10 plus hour Ethan Mollick rule. You can't read about this. You can't, just sit back and let the management consultants figure it out, because, frankly, they're just learning as fast as they're trying to learn as fast as everybody else. You got to get your hands in the dirt. Otherwise, the company that you compete with that does that is going to mop the floor with you.
I think the interesting thing there too is the rise of the AI startups that are tackling various different industries, and the mid-market to enterprise companies that don't adopt AI, they're going to get eaten up by these startups that are just creeping into their space and doing things more efficiently, with more automation, with more AI technology. So the CEOs that have a strategy and adopt a strategy are going to continue to thrive, and the ones that are behind will lose market share for sure to some of these more agile, nimble startups that are becoming more mid-market companies these days.
Yeah, and there's a great piece of content. I don't know if we had shared this with each other beforehand, but if not, we'll find it and make sure that we add it to the links. But the Stripe annual report. So they describe the AI economy and the pace with which these unicorns are now reaching 100 million in revenue, and how much faster it is than the previous platform shift with cloud and SaaS and so on and so forth. Right. We've all kind of heard this, but when you start seeing companies generating $17 million in 3 months of ARR because they're putting the ingredients together the right way, solving a real problem, and in a sustainable way, it's just staggering, which is exciting. There's always two ways to look at it. It's either terrifying or exciting or somewhere in between. But yeah, to your point, Stephen, I think I've said to you many times that I think the middle market territory, especially private equity involved middle market, is moving as fast, if not faster, than any other territory, because you have the right combination of ingredients, including, a dimension of humble confidence in making these moves and burning boats. And I think the results are speaking for themselves, and people are seeing that. The leadership stuff is I think the hardest part, is just the conviction that is required and the multi-dimensional and cross-functional, consensus almost. That word is a tough one, but you do need functional leaders across a C-suite of a big company, a mid-sized company, a startup, to move in a certain direction. And a lot of this feels very different than the way we quote unquote used to do things, but you just got to keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's shift to the next question. So there's obviously a shift with the market kind of moving away from application centricity and to more data centricity.
Yeah.
Can you define that shift and then basically drill into the implications around going from an application-centric architecture to a data-centric architecture?
Yeah, I love that question. That's one of the most exciting next level competitions enabled by the launch of ChatGPT, November 2022, right? So the world was, just reacting to it for a period of time. And now more or less the frontier model infrastructure, et cetera, has kind of hardened, and, people understand, what the Anthropics of the world do versus the open AIs versus some others, et cetera. So now some of the smartest, most aggressive in a good way, entrepreneurs, investors, and what have you are becoming quite clear in the way they're building companies associated with the following. And so I always talk about this stuff as like above the waterline or below the waterline, or we'll use a sandwich, because a sandwich is another really easy way to think about it. So the bottom piece of bread is the real deal data infrastructure. And up top, all the way up top, you have, systems that monitor business applications, which are in between. But think of those business applications as vertical silos, for lack of a better term, that are systems of record. So a system of record in the CRM space, I think we all know the first one that comes to mind. A system of record in the HR space, and so go all the way down the line. But those systems of record, generally speaking, I think we've all had this experience as employees. The data sets in one system of record aren't necessarily talking to data sets in another system of record. And I think you know that as an employee, because you constantly have to log into different business applications to achieve a workflow. And for some reason, each of them don't recognize you the way that you might think that they do, even though they each have data sets about you, right? So if you kind of take that to its next, step in the progression, there is an opportunity to move from what is called as you called out, right, is a business application architecture, which kind of reflects the silos within which businesses have been built for 20, 40, 50 years, which is kind of how the software within the SaaS world was built. Move from that to something that's much more, open and connected, which is referred to as a data-centric architecture. Now, there's two reasons why that's so important. So the first reason is your sandwich, which you got the foundation, big foundation data sets down here, and then stuff that monitors up here, and all these verticalized, kind of siloed systems of record. A lot of those walls will come down. And what we mean by that is the data in one system of record is now going to, more or less, be joined with other data sets in other previously siloed environments. The implications of that are staggering, right? Because when you move into a data-centric architecture, what happens is all of those data sets are now able to be understood and processed into insights, and created, experiences are then able to be created where businesses, for example, can use those data sets to see things that they previously never before could see. And therefore they can make decisions faster based on information they never had at their disposal at that pace. You can start to step in to democratize access, where non-technical people who used to have a bottleneck they would have to deal with, which is they'd have to sell the product and engineering team on helping them out so they could do their job and so on and so forth better. You can kind of get rid of all of those constraints. And so this is where you start to get into conversations about, hey, maybe AGI is not the thing we should be thinking about as much as, to Satya Nadella's point, what I think about, which he said, I think on the, can't remember if it was BG2 or who he talked to, but a couple of weeks back, he thinks about when and where can we get to a 10% growth in the GDP? And that's not as far-fetched anymore as we used to think it was. And a lot of that has to do with this notion of unleashing all of those data sets so that they can talk to each other. Intelligent applications can be built through semantic layers that then can enable non-technical people to access insights they've never seen before and create value at a pace that's just staggering. And everything I just said isn't theory, and it's not just like strategy stuff. Like, this is all real, and we can point to it in different environments where this can happen. So I'll give a big shout out to my crew at Relational AI, as well as Snowflake, obviously. And if you just look at the Q4 earnings and the things that Sridhar Ramaswamy, the CEO, said, I think you'll know just how real it is and just how much Wall Street is cheering them on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, when you break down those data silos too, with kind of the rise of agents, the ability to, allow for AI agents to cross through the various different business applications that exist within an enterprise is huge, right? So you combine those two powerful things and you're creating more and more automation, right, within an enterprise or a large company that essentially has been rooted in siloed applications, siloed groups, and basically connective tissue between those different groups.
Without a doubt. And let's touch on that real quick, to your point, and you nailed it. Autonomous AI agents, oversimplifying it, but let's just assume that they have photographic memories, they work 24/7, they don't have to sleep, all these good things, and they're really, really good at very specific jobs. And a lot of those jobs they're really good at are the kind of jobs that we as human beings would probably prefer to delegate to them. So we've got to get better at, quote unquote, managing and leading a digital workforce, AI agents, and deploying them into these, kind of workflow, component parts where they can do their work and free us up to take that next step and do those higher impact dimensions of work. And it reminds me of, I think it was last week, one of the leads of AI at Ford was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal at GTC. He described that there was a process that used to take 54,000 seconds, I think it was 15 hours, which was to use some clay to create a model of like what a new car concept could be, so they could run some tests and stress test it and figure out if it works and yada yada. But now, and this steps into something that you and I want to talk about for sure with digital twins, but now he has built an AI system that takes that 54,000 second kind of task and compresses it to 10 seconds. And now he chains it together, or he alluded to it, I should be fair. He alluded to chaining it together via agentic workflows. And now imagine if you can take one 54,000, dimension of a task, basically a project, a workflow, and combine that with a number of others. And imagine how much faster Ford can iterate and figure out what the right next vehicle is, or whatever the objective is, versus doing it the old-fashioned way, which again, that's why I use the horses and cars thing, because we all can understand if you're racing, a company that is competing with you using cars and you've got horses, unless your terrain is very rugged, I don't think you're going to have much luck.
Yeah, perfectly said.
And I'm going to throw a curveball. I love this conversation, and I'm going to throw a curveball.
Here we go.
As to why, so thinking about the reality of the application centric versus data centric. Yeah. But to your point earlier, how it's reflective of the silos that already exist.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how can technology, how can we flip it on its head? Because of course, ideally you come back, you restructure the organization, you look at how this is done, but the reality of it is that they're going to need some help. And how can technology help with breaking of those silos from the perspective of the non-traditional path to change management?
I love that question, Tati. And you and I met, around the time where we were talking about, what effectively was digital business transformation, end-to-end digital transformation, which had a lot to do with cloud and SaaS and so on and so forth. And one of the things I think that you and I bonded on was this notion of people, process, and technology. and just getting out of the headspace, which unfortunately exists a lot, of these silver bullets, right? The technology, that's great, right? Good for you. You've got a really fast car, but guess what? If you have no gas because you didn't figure out that you need gas for your car, you're not going anywhere, right? You have the fastest car in the world in your garage. It's not happening, right? So I think the technology can do, we'll call it the data infrastructure and technical infrastructure, but I think those two together can do two things that are really interesting within that triangle of people, process, and technology. The first is they can help you see things that you didn't necessarily know. As a guy that geeks out all day on AI-enabled knowledge graphs, ontology, and all these nerdy things, which you all unfortunately have to hear about more often than you probably would like, seeing things that you haven't seen before, that's a pretty great place to be, right? But then simultaneously, I think when you get into territories like a LangChain, for example, which I know we love, you can turn things on so much faster in this modern, infrastructure that's Gen AI native and experiment, right? So it's one thing to see it. It's an entirely different thing to run an experiment against it, to say, okay, I see these insights that I hadn't seen before. Well, what if I did this, or what if I did that? The what if I did this, or what if I did that, with the technology tools available today, way less costly, way less risky, and extremely iterative, which I think the modularity of these tools is something that really gets business people in particular excited, because they've always heard, and maybe you've heard this, Tati, which I'm imagining, wink, wink, you have some stories on this, of it's always like, oh, that sounds great, but we have to rip and replace all, this, that, and the other thing, 7-8 figures, this, all this risk, and so on and so forth. And those days are pretty much moving in the rear view mirror. There's still big investments that need to be made, don't get me wrong. But there are very fast accelerators that you can put in place to create value in a super compressed time to value ratio, which tends to get everybody's attention and puts everybody on the same page. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I think it's helping you see things you hadn't seen before, and then helping you act on them way faster, way more efficiently, without taking on all this risk. Nobody likes risk,
You know how I feel about this, because it's the key to thinking about something like a LangChain modular tool that can come and sit atop of these systems, which are it's not feasible to rip and replace for various reasons. Maybe it's the 1% that could afford to do it, and even if they can afford to do it, should they do it? So that there's a lot of questions around that, and around the downsides, which I had got to witness firsthand. The downside when things, which they never do go 100% right, and even when you are trying to rip and replace. So there's so much there's so much to unpack there. The other thing that came to mind is that Gartner CIO survey, and I was poking at this a little bit as well, because it was around this idea that they had the smart operators out there, the smart CIOs, they're smart COOs, they're really working together to identify the technology needs, the gap between the high performing and the lower performing CIOs, and when they talk about what's created that advantage, at the center of that is that collaboration, is working together to figure it out. Real business, again, everything we're talking about, you've been talking about, but the real business needs, how to solve them, how to work together, very much in the same way that data versus application centric idea. So I think that there's definitely that. Shifting the attention to that is going to be crucial for especially organizations that are afraid to make the jump. And like you said, there's an availability of these modular tools, the accelerators, the ways to look at this and say, okay, I can invest, I can see that return within 3 months, 6 months, even less, depending on the case, on something I'm investing in. And creating momentum for myself, for my team, for that CEO that maybe is not 100% sure on which tool we should, which way we should go, what we should go after exactly. So I think that's really, really interesting. And I wanted to shift, not really a shift, but to look at talking about that and modular solutions, and the piece from Ravi Gupta on AI or Die.
Yeah, that was pretty
you
direct.
talked about a couple weeks ago. That was really, really insightful and interesting. And so much that has been said about the proof of concepts that companies are standing up for AI, but these pilots having, as with many pilots out there, having difficulties moving to production, especially at scale. And why do you think that is?
First of all, that Ravi Gupta piece, AI or Die, I think we need more of that type of content that's written that way, because it's impossible to read it and not understand exactly what he's saying. It's tight, it's compressed, it's like a micro essay, and it's it's coming from venture capitalists, which of course there's a dimension of it that aligns with a goal set that's a little bit different than perhaps someone who would write it a different way. But I think that the thing that really struck me was this notion. I think he called it unfounding your company, essentially. I don't think he's wrong about that, and I think that's a really difficult thing for
Refounding. He said you needed to refound your company.
Refound. Thank you. That's what it was. And I think that if you're being intellectually honest, if the bigger your company and the longer it's been around, by definition, the more intellectual property it has inside of its data sets, inside of its walls, inside of it, the heads of the people that work there, and so on and so forth. And maybe instead of looking at that as a challenge that, oh my gosh, you're going to have to basically reinvent your business and restructure and so on and so forth. I think the other way to look at that, and again, coming from the data guy, is you have a enormous amount of intellectual property to unleash. And I don't think you have to do all of it at once. I don't think that, it's just, but you have to recognize that you've got to do things in a very different way. And I think one of the things that, and I'm not sure if this is answering the question, but one of the things that I think, people are starting to realize is that within companies that have silos, literally and figuratively, you really need to bring more cross-functional leadership teams together that have P&L responsibilities so that they can operationalize this stuff for real, as opposed to all due respect to the collective IT people out there that have developed a reputation historically, and Steve, I'm sure you can chime in on this one as well, of kind of not being the easiest group to work with sometimes, because they kind of just write the check and then they throw the technology at the business people who are like, I don't understand. You didn't, this is not, they learn over time, unfortunately, that the technology was not purpose built for the workflow, and therefore there's all sorts of dimensions of friction that are created inside of that. And so it's a long-winded way of saying, which is not really answering your question very well, but it's a long-winded way of saying, I think that the more people can get to know their neighbors in businesses functionally, and the more P&L responsibility associated directly with these technical investments with multiple stakeholders at the table, the more successful you're going to be in finding the right use case and compressing time to value in a way that's scalable, not just a shiny object pilot POC, which is notorious. And that's all that, let's just AI it stuff. And I think those days are going to, move behind us rather quickly, because the companies that are doing this well are going to rip market share from those that are not, and it's going to happen at scale, which I think is the next 6 to 12 months. Some of the things we're going to see are going to be quite surprising.
Yeah, what's really interesting is you see a lot of companies that are getting into the proof of concepts and the pilots around AI, and allowing different groups within the organization to try to innovate with AI within their own silos. I'm curious, Alec, what you've seen or heard around, how do you take something from a proof of concept or a pilot to an actual production system, right? The concept of kind of the skunkworks IT project, but then how do you operationalize it and actually make it something that is productionalized and ripe for business?
I love that question, and I'm going to give you the soft, kind of lame answer, but I do believe what I'm about to say, which is I think it all starts with humble, confident leadership. I really do. And I'm talking about the kind of leadership from a business or from a technical perspective that says, hey, here's what I know, here's what I know I don't know, and we all need to kind of come together and figure this out together, because so much of this stuff can be very clear and visible in hindsight, but sometimes people don't want to say the quiet part out loud. So I'll say it right within retail, and Tati, you know exactly which example I'm going to go to. I still can't for the life of me understand why there are systems that understand me as Alec in a physical store that are kind of different, if not completely disjointed and disconnected from the systems that know me when I'm at home on my computer, with their e-commerce infrastructure. And then the gap between the two and all of the value that's lost and spilled all over the place, right? And the lack of loyalty, because I'm not a guy that really spends a lot of time shopping and enjoying it, right? And I probably shouldn't say it that way, but it's just not something I really enjoy. I like being advised. I like getting in and out. I like doing my thing. And I'd be super loyal to a brand that would figure those things out. But it is shocking to me. And you guys know, because you had to hear those 2 silly stories from 2 weeks ago, where I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I think there's a humble confidence in the leadership that's required to step into this territory and say, hey, we can't do things the way that we used to do them. This is a new era. There's a fundamental platform shift, which is the most extraordinary platform shift we've ever seen in our lifetime. And there are going to be big winners and there's going to be losers, and we don't want to be a loser. So let's figure it out. So that's the softest, but I hope decent answer, Steve, to answer the question is it all starts with the culture of the organization, starting with the culture of the leadership team that come together. And if it's a safe environment to say, I don't know, right? Help me understand, because if you don't, and you just pretend like you do, you're going to get run over. There's a freight train coming, if you don't actually understand this stuff and meaningfully deploy it, because the team that you compete with, it's over.
Yeah, I agree. And the example that you actually brought me was the one with L'Oreal and their case study with LangChain. I mean, it's amazing what they've done in terms of, there's all these AI projects going on, but the ability to kind of create a governance structure across the organization and a centralized way to basically review and approve and monitor those AI projects and the use of AI within their organization from a governance standpoint.
100%. Thomas Menard, big shout out to him. Idea to impact less than 90 days for a company of that size. I remember when I read that case and I fell off my chair, literally. And I've been very fortunate to engage with him digitally. I've never met him in real life, but I can't wait to go to Paris and check things out. But think about the implications of being able to move that fast. But to your point, Steve, the governance framework, and especially, in any industry, but the more regulated, the more important you got to start there is, how do you understand that governance framework and what that risk profile looks like? And, in creativity, for example, a creative exercise, hallucinations are fantastic because that's called ideation. But in finance, for example, hallucinations are not good. That's how you get on the wrong side of a trade. Nobody likes that, which stories. But in any case, yeah, I think Tati might have some thoughts on that too, which I want to give you a shot to jump in on that, because I know you've been having some very interesting conversations around that topic.
100%, and interesting that Steve mentioned the L'Oreal case, because that's what made me go into the rabbit hole of learning more and fall in love eventually with LangChain and what it could do. I did not know I find myself to be a well-informed leader and well-informed in technology, actually driving technology transformation, and I didn't know how far that could go. Yeah. So it kind of grounded me to okay, if I didn't know that, my colleagues need, and every conversation I'm having out there with people and helping them understand what it can do without rip and replace, without having to do something that's completely foreign to the organization, something that will work in a modular fashion. It blew my mind and is blowing the minds of everyone I'm talking to about this. So it's very exciting for me. But I would say that the other piece to this, which is really helpful in speaking about how do the POCs, how do these proof of concept become reality? Everything you say is spot on. And I would say there's one piece to that, which is this, in a collaboration and culture can feel really fuzzy. If someone is listening, is like, oh, well, big words, and what does it actually mean? One of the things it means very practically and tactically is the transparency on the workload, the process, the change management, which all these things, by having the right partner, whether it's the right technology company is working for you, your team, because there is one of the things that saying the quiet part out loud is that there has to be a joint effort.
Oh yeah.
Because you can't just set it and forget it is not something that is going to give you the right. And that's often the approach companies have had with technology. Well, as long as we buy it, we find the vendor, we buy it, we pay for it, we're good to go, right? We can advance. And I think that taking that into their own hands, and the L'Oreal example is a fantastic one, when it really, and LangChain allows for you to do that, make it highly tailored to the needs to your organization, but without the team at L'Oreal being an integral part of that work, it would never have worked the way it did. So that will be my extra comment on that. I agree with everything you both said, but that to me is a key piece that at times gets missed in creating more of this collaboration and breaking the silos and those really honest conversations and the ability to say, I don't know, what is this now? How long would it take? Can my team handle it? How much help do we need? How fast can we go?
Without a doubt. And I think the stating the obvious, but it's also, there's some good news here too, is that it's not like you have to all of a sudden, go out and hire hundreds of people with, Gen AI native skill sets and this, that, and the other thing, right? We can all learn from each other. But there is a place, without a doubt, for an honest assessment of, are we ready to step into this? And if we're not, how do we seek help to do that? Because there's absolutely no way that anyone inside the four walls of a large company like that can keep pace while also doing their job, but keep pace with how quickly things are evolving and shifting. And I hope anybody that watches this, and I say it every time, and I'm supposed to call it X, if you're not on AI Twitter, if you're not following the narrative in that environment, you got to do it, because it's like reading the news 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. And it's incredibly helpful, but it's impossible, literally impossible, to catch up on this stuff without, getting a different, perspective from folks that might be a little more native, a little more involved, and, this, that, and the other thing. But it's kind of where we go back to culture and humble, confident leadership. Say, hey, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. We'll figure this out. Without that, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know. It's pretty tough to imagine a scenario where you're going to adapt and evolve with these new tools, given the application architecture shift to application centric to data centric, for example, and the implications of that alone, to Steve's credit and point, are just, I think, a bit much for a quote unquote traditional operating model to be able to evolve without getting help.
You just summarized the 3 things I tell all my colleagues and leaders that are out there thinking about this. Number 1, you can do way more than you think.
Yes.
Number 2, you can't do it alone. Number 3, you need to be part of it. So these are like, if you only remember 3 things as a leader, those are the 3 things you got to remember. And and the 4th one, which is obvious through this conversation, is really, it has to be now. You have to be working on this now. You cannot be something and I'll speak about retail, but something that you hear often is the fast follower rule of like, let me watch someone else apply, invest, see what works for them, and then I can kind of go and take their learnings. It's not going to work this time because they're not going to have enough time to catch up. So
no. And I'm glad you say that. And I know we're running into time a bit here, but I'm going to double click and I'm going to echo that, because we're stepping into exponential change. So a big platform shift like this doesn't come along that often. And the thing that's different here is now you've got, to Igor's point, 5 to 10x the firepower of an enabled individual, and therefore, groups of individuals, a la company, within these, AI native systems. And if one company, really leans in and figures this stuff out, another is kind of flat-footed, unfortunately, there comes a time where I don't know how they catch up. And so to your point, I think that we are at that moment where I think a lot of folks, including the CEOs from that survey, AKA I might be out of a job in 2 years if I don't figure out this AI stuff, realize that it's go time. So hopefully that message comes through loud and clear.
Do we have time for another question, or are we gonna save it for the next meeting?
One more question, Steve. You're on the hook. I know we didn't get to something in there I have an idea of what it is. I don't want to bias you, but there was one question that you said you wanted to talk about, and I said, "Oh yeah, I geek out on that subject. I like that one." Do you know which one
Yeah,
it was?
so that is all about digital twins. So can you explain what a digital twin is and why they're so interesting?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fun one. A digital twin is a little bit abstract, but imagine a scenario. Imagine creating a digital representation of, let's say, your operating model, your business, whatever it might be, so that you can stress test, for example, scenarios or what ifs. So an example would be supply chains, right? A very complicated and very timely topic. You definitely want a digital twin of your supply chain right now if you're in the business of navigating a whole lot of complexity as the tariff game unfolds. So that's a tangible example of how you can bring to life a digital twin. I think a digital twin is really interesting when it comes to the next generation of use. So they kind of were born more or less in some manufacturing territories, more industrial. Supply chain would be an example. I think it's really interesting to think about digital twins within the context of marketing, actually. And a lot of the different ways that, there's that old adage, which is obviously not true anymore, but, 50% of my, advertising and marketing works, but I'm not sure which 50%. The cool part about that is that, that's not really true anymore, obviously, but I think the idea of creating incredibly bespoke and customized experiences and stress testing those in advance using digital twins that are representative via AI agents that represent, your top ICPs, et cetera, and testing those concepts so that the next time Tati goes to a killer tennis tournament, you're not handing out little tchotchkes and ribbons and I don't know what was going on down there, but you're creating an incredible bespoke experience that is worthy of Tati's time, besides watching what I think is my favorite sport, especially live. But digital twins is definitely something that you're going to be hearing a whole lot more of, especially as Jensen and NVIDIA are really starting to lean into these models of the real world, which are going to take things to a whole nother level. So yeah, digital twins, definitely can geek on that for a long time. That was an unfair question to ask at the very end because I'm trying to truncate. I'm looking at the time, 42. Boy, we went. This is great. I'm going to wrap it up on that. But you guys, this is awesome. I'm glad that we did this, and hopefully there's something in here that people are going to find interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
All right. See you soon.